So please give a big welcome to Marike van Beurden and welcome to Dublin.
Thank you. That was actually a great pronunciation of my name. I'm impressed. So just a little bit of an introduction of who I am. I'm originally from the Netherlands and I studied pastry since I was 11. My high school was already with pastry. I knew it very young what I wanted to do. But that back then in the Netherlands, the level wasn't as high. So I moved to Belgium. And from Belgium, the goal was France. Moved to London instead. Worked for a French chef though. So I was working for Pierre Gagnère in Cinq. Me would always said I will never go into restaurants. I never got out of restaurants. So basically when she started and the whole creative part behind it, I moved then to Paris, but decided to work for a hotel instead of a restaurant, not because I didn't want to work the big hours, but I wanted to work also for myself. I wanted to create, I wanted to make sugar showpieces, chocolate showpieces, would stay overnight with my colleagues just to train and test. And from that, I lived in a couple more places in France. And I moved to Hong Kong, which was a big challenge. I took on that role without ever having been there, sold off my stuff, and went there. And then you see the skyscrapers and you go, what did I do? I mean, you probably know what it is as well when you arrive in a different country. And from there, like in the meantime as well, I did a lot of competitions. And from chefing, I went into a different part, but we will come to that in a little bit. So while I was working in France, actually already in Belgium and in London, I started to do competitions. Why? Because I wanted to test my own skills. I wanted to put deadlines on learning new things. Quite often it's always like, yeah, we're always tired after a long day of work, but you want to try new recipes. And the only one who will push you is yourself. And by putting deadlines to it, you actually have to do it. So for example, I did the C3 and I became the French candidate. I signed up knowing I would never win because the French will never elect a Dutch chef to represent France in the world finals. But then there was Pierre Hermé, who was really struggling to pronounce the name. You saw him looking at it. And there was me, another French pastry chef, but from origins Benin. So we looked to each other, it's you or me here. And so I ended up winning the competition and representing France in the world finals. And that as a Dutch pastry chef, well, your goal is working and living in France, was super unique. The other competition which really brought me a lot of my career is World Chocolate Masters, because you're on your own and you have to do this massive competition, this big selection. And the only way for me to compete there was doing it from Hong Kong as a Dutch candidate, because back then I wasn't living long enough in Hong Kong. So I had to find sponsors who would help me in budgets, because I had to fly twice to Europe to bring all my stuff along. And now I have so much more respect, like in the Coupe du Monde La Pâtisserie, for all the teams that come from overseas. It's a whole different ball game than when you're in Europe and you put everything in a truck and you drive over. So I won the Dutch selection, and then you have to start everything again for the final. And it's basically 2 years of my life was only testing, trying, time trainings, and fundraising as well, because a competition like that, you can't do it with a big budget. So in the end, I became second in the World Chocolate Masters. And that for me was, of course, I wanted to win. Second, it's the worst position and one of the best positions. But still, I've been the only woman who's ever been on that podium. So would have done, like a lot of people thought I would compete again. I thought I would do it again, but I had so much more to lose because I came in as an underdog and nobody knew about me and I became second. And then when you have become second and then you need to win, that's a whole different pressure. And in the meantime, I actually left the restaurant industry. Not because, once again, the hours, but I wanted to see more, learn more, do more. Because in the restaurant, you're in between those four walls all the time. And I needed a new challenge. And by consulting and meeting other chefs, working with other chefs, different ingredients, you need to change that. And from consultant, I became entrepreneur. But there we go. We talk in a little bit later because that's a whole different story again. So as we're saying, like Chocolate Masters has been a big thing for my career. And it really helped me to really shape what I was doing. So from the kitchen, I actually became more like, I became a nerd about formulation, to be honest. Because we, like when you're doing consulting, you're doing demos, it's quite often and a mousse and a crémeux and a biscuit and with a different flavor and just a slightly different shape. And at one point I was like, I want to really put myself, like to a challenge to really create new items. So I wanted to write a book, a completely different book than what I was going to write. And that was a plant-based book. I was challenged to write a plant-based book. But connecting science to it. Really underbuild the science in your recipes. The book never happened. I will explain a little bit why. But when I started to work on the plant-based industry, you start to look into the ingredients that are available. And there's much more now, but now we're talking about 2018, 2019. And you look at the ingredient lists, and all the ingredients, well, like for example, you work with vegetable creams, all the stabilizers, the type of fats used, I still wanted to make high quality pastry. So I still want only high quality ingredients. So in the end, I was like, okay, you know what? I'm just going to formulate my own formulas. I'm not a food scientist. So you have to go back to the roots of your ingredients. What do they do in your recipe? What are you looking for? And understand all the replacements that are in the market. So by starting to formulate, COVID happened. And being an international consultant where you travel all over the world and have an agenda filled up for a year in advance, it got cancelled. And so then my now business partner, he said to me, but if you say that doesn't exist, why don't we try and launch it? But of course, then the recipe wasn't good enough. So then it was really back to the drawing board and really like formulate all your different recipes and bring that, into production. So before we go to that, like with the traveling as a pastry chef, as a consultant, and having a lot of, I work from Mexico to Japan to South Africa, ingredients everywhere around the world are completely different. Just different flours, different water absorptions. It changes your recipes. So you have to feel and really understand your doughs, because at the moment you never have time to try them in advance. You have to really listen to your ingredients, because at the moment you can still add a little bit more water or change things. The moment has been in the oven, not anymore. So by the traveling, you also understand that geographically, recipes change. Not only for the ingredients, but also for the flavor profiles. A same recipe, for example, just if we talk about Asia, which was my main area I was working. In China, Hong Kong, Korea, Japan, it cannot be sweet. But in Hong Kong and China, for example, cannot be sour either. If you go more to Japan, Korea, there can be more sour. If I would go to Indonesia, I would even have to I would make like a banana cream with just a hint of passion fruit. Oh, it's so sour. And you're like, so sour? Like there is literally 2% of passion fruit puree in there. But they picked it up straight away. So I knew every time when I would go to Indonesia, I would need to adapt my recipes. Even raspberry would be too sweet. India, I would have to do it more sweet as well. But also you have to adapt it to the type of customers. Like if I work or consult or do courses for a high-end restaurant, I can have way more steps into my recipes. But if I work for a bakery chain, I can be the arrogant chef who goes, no, I want 10 layers. They will never be able to produce it. So you need to adapt every time to where you are and your type of customers. But for example, and you must know it well as well, baking in Mexico is another challenge with the height. Like you're on 3,000, 2.5? Exactly. So your caramel, your water boils at 98 degrees. Your caramels, you have, 94 even, yeah. So then the caramels, you have to lower everything. But then, for example, I have exactly the same oven as I had in the kitchen over there. I had mainly the same ingredients, just the flour was a bit different, that I knew. And with the financiers, I was like, no, it's 25 minutes. We've done it so many times. And I was convinced that it would be 25 minutes. We took them out. They were raw in the middle. Well, the outside looked great, but the inside, it took us much longer to bake. It took us double the time to bake. So, but also the flour picks up way more water there. Luckily, I knew that from another course, so now I was already straight away, let's put a bit more water in there. And so you're really adapting your recipes to altitude, ingredients, machinery, obviously, as well. And that is like, you have to be flexible. You have to know what you're doing. And so that's the same like with understanding like the plant-based ingredients. You need to understand, what am I doing in a recipe? Quite often we want to jump steps when we're formulating, because we're like, okay, we need to replace the egg, so I'm just going to replace this. Yeah, but wait, the egg has more than 99 molecules in there. We need to understand which part are we using, and then we need to understand the ingredients that are the replacements that we can use. So that one we have already been skipping a little bit. So when we go into like formulation, we have to understand, which texture do I want? Which ingredients am I replacing? So to come back on the egg, for example, if I make a crispy cookie, I can replace my eggs, very simple, water and starch. But if I do that in an American style cookie, I will get a crispy American style cookie. You want to have the moist part, so you need to actually replace it with ingredients that give you that kind of texture. So my water will still be the base. Water is in, when I make plant-based pastries, if I can replace liquids for water, go for water. It's cheap and it's the most natural ingredient. But you have to really find back the texture, what the egg is doing in my recipe. So if my egg brings you, for example, I need the coagulation, like in a tart or a cookie, I go for starch and water. If I need the whipping, I need protein. So then depending on what recipe I'm making, I can go for a potato protein, a pea protein. I can use soy, but I try and stay away from soy. But I also need a raising agent, baking powder, baking soda. And like that, this is the way how we start to replace ingredients in our plant-based products. So you don't need animal-derived ingredients to make great pastry. When I started in plant-based pastry, and I would create a recipe, and I would let it taste to friends, and they would go, yeah, no, it's good for vegan. No, so it's not good enough. Why is it good for vegan and not for everybody else? Plant-based pastry can be as tasty or even more pure in flavor than traditional pastry. Why? Because we don't have butter flavors overtaking our fruits or our beautiful origin chocolate. We work lighter quite often, but we need to know how to replace our basics ingredients. That is the most important. So when I create pastry, plant-based, I don't tell it's plant-based, because a lot of people will go straight away, have a vision, like, oh, plant-based cannot be tasty. So, or, yeah, it's all right for that. Or, no, it needs to be great for everybody. And it needs to go like, this is a good cake. So where does Be Better come from? So this basically is the shift that I made during COVID. So like I said before, COVID really ruined my calendar, ruined the way I could work, because I was always traveling, courses, and consulting on recipe and all of that. So when my now business partner said to me, why don't we launch it? I basically was formulating in my own kitchen at home with a Thermomix, a super bag, and a blast freezer to try and do the water dispersion in the fats. Once I had a recipe that I was happy with, I started to bake cookies, cakes, and all the different elements that we can make with butter. When I had that recipe, my business partner went with a tupper to a co-producer, and they were like, wait, she made that at home? So then they were super interested of launching the product together. But then R&D comes in. And so I got 8 formulas sent that I had to test. And I opened all the tuppers that came, and I was like, oh my God, this one looks awful. And it was original Be Better My Friend recipe. And I was like, oh. So I called R&D. I was like, but mine didn't look like that. They're like, yeah, but we can use 20 times less lecithin than what you are using. Because what you do yourself with smaller equipment, of course, when you have the right machinery in doing the water dispersion, is completely different. So when I had those 8 formulas, I did the same thing: cookies, cakes, buttercreams. Wrote a whole report. I wasn't happy. got 8 more formulas. Same thing. Still wasn't happy because you have one time to launch your product. And so we did that as third round. And then I had the recipe that today is Be Better, my friend. And then starts the whole journey of branding, about launching. And then that's a whole different ballgame, because then I really got pulled out of the kitchen in the end into how to launch a product. So at the moment we are in an investment round, that's a whole different thing. Like you on calls, we did an incubator program. And so during the incubator program, didn't even know what the word incubator meant 3 years ago. But same thing, you do all these talks. Oh, you're pre-seed, seed, Series A, what are you looking for? And I was just like smiling on the call. And then later on, after the call, I called my business partner and I was convinced he knew exactly what they were talking about, right? Because he was just like, yeah. He was like, no, I'm Googling too. Okay. So you really have to question everything again. Like you become an entrepreneur. And not only an entrepreneur, but for me, well, definitely not only an entrepreneur, I'm still a chef. So for me, it's not about only launching the product, it's really about making pastries better. So we also choose to not put butter aroma or coloring in Be Better. It's a white color which shocks chefs quite often when they open the packaging. But me as a chef, I wanted to be in charge of the flavor. I don't want, when I make a lemon cream, I add butter, it overtakes from lemon. I want to taste lemon. I get a beautiful original chocolate, and now I add eggs and butter, and I lose the flavor of the eggs. So we are not only a butter, yes, we are a plant-based butter alternative, but we are used by a lot of chefs as well in traditional pastry to get more intense flavors, to really keep that flavor of chocolate, of fruits, and to be you as a chef really in the driving seat. Like, I want this flavor of my fruits. We don't always need butter flavor. Butter in recipes is used as a texturizer. And so we need it in a lot of our recipes. Well, we actually want fruit flavors. So therefore, I choose the pure flavor. So we already spoke a little bit about this before. Quite often, we jump and we go, let's change this. But then it doesn't work. And you go, yeah, but now I don't know if it was the protein or if it was the baking powder or if it was that. So technically, if we start to change recipes, we should only change one ingredient at a time. The hard part is we often don't have time for that. So the way we work now in the kitchen, we always have a computer on the table. Everything goes in percentage. All our recipes go in percentage, the system calculates it, and you will see patterns. Like I was saying before, if we just think about the egg yolk, what is in the egg yolk I need to understand. So to come back on, for example, a sablé, my traditional recipe was butter, yolks, icing sugar, flour. It became Be Better, icing sugar, starch, flour, water. So I'm on a cheaper recipe that tastes almost the same. Same crispiness, same color, even though your dough in the beginning is super white, but it picks up the same color. How did I come to that? You think about, okay, butter, one-on-one replacement. So Be Better is a one-on-one replacement for your traditional cow butter. Same amount, same workability. Icing sugar, I stayed the same. Now I need to replace my yolk. So what's in my yolks? Lecithin. I don't need lecithin here because there's enough flour to do the emulsion in between the water and the fat. There's fat in egg yolks, but there's enough butter in the recipe. The amount that's in my egg yolks doesn't make a difference. Liquid, yes, I do need liquid in my recipe. And I needed a coagulation during the baking. So coagulation, starch helps me to absorb, to hold my tart shape. And then water. So the first recipe I did, it was 180 yolks, so I did the same amount of water and starch as 180 grams. But of course, the viscosity of a water or an egg yolk is not the same. So the dough was way too soft. So in the end, my 180 grams of an egg yolk become 20 grams of starch and 80 grams of water, which is only 100 grams. So yes, it does change the percentage of the recipe a little bit. But of course, you also have to look at viscosity of the ingredients you are replacing with. Now, if I think, about baking, quite often we can still work with water, but we will need, if you need the raising agent of the eggs, you're going to work with baking powder, baking soda. And like that, you really have to look at your ingredients. Gelatines, agar, and pectin and H in general. I always use more than one texturizer to quite often create your texture that you're really looking for. That is the hard part with going into plant-based pastry. There's not one solution for all. Like there's a lot of chefs who ask me, can you not just make one egg replacement? Yes, I tried, it doesn't work. So it is more complex than that. That's for sure. And the most important is here that you understand what is happening in your traditional recipes, and you need to know the replacement ingredients. What does each do? And then it becomes connecting the dots. And also, once you start to work in percentage, like you have all your recipes in percentage, you start to see patterns. It becomes much easier. And like now it's like, okay, we want to create this new cookie. So we know we need to be around this amount of our vegan egg white replacement. We know we need to be around this amount, for example, nuts. The last week, and actually shooting today, we did a whole series of the same cookie, but different nuts. So it's like from pistachio to macadamia to peanuts. The recipe does adapt quite a lot because now you need to take in consideration the fat of each of the nuts. That also affects during the baking and the way it behaves and the crispiness. And some we bake on a lower temperature. Think about pistachio, if not I lose all the color. Hazelnut, much nicer on a bit higher temperature. So by just like even though it's all nuts and it comes from the same base recipe, we don't have a one solution for all. It's not just replace your nuts and you have 10 flavors of cookies. So I know I do have the advantage to have an amazing team in my kitchen who keep on doing all these tests while I'm traveling, because it is a lot of work. But therefore as well, like, we're there to help you. And with me, there's a lot of chefs that do this for a living and are really willing to help other chefs to go ahead on this. Because I know time is quite often an issue once we work in kitchens. So this is a little bit what we spoke about Be Better before. Like, it's been trials and error. And it is that consistency of just trying to go for the best and keep on looking and working hard to find the solution that really works. Because like I said before, once you launch a new brand or a new product, you only have one chance to do it right. People will say test once, and if it's not perfect or it's not good enough, that's where you lose it. And I mean, we went from being a startup, we're still a startup, but we are distributed in 12 countries now within 3 years. So I have to say, like, it's been very hard. It's not an easy journey. I understand very well why a lot of startups don't make it or people stop, because it is like, we need to help chefs understand the changes, but also we have different reasons why we want to change into plant-based butter. It is the pure flavor, it's plant-based pastry, but also think about the EU law, the Zero Net 2050. We have a huge amount of carbon reduction and water reduction. So in this way, we are creating pastry for the future. By replacing one ingredient, you start to make easy steps into changing into pastry for the future. So over here, you can see a little bit where the big differences are coming in color and texture. On the left, you will have a completely traditional recipe. In the middle, it's a dairy-free. And then the last one is a plant-based lemon tart. So you see, like, even though we are a very light color, you see that the most comes from the color from the eggs, well, also the butter. So, but in the end, yes, on looks we are much whiter, but once you taste the flavor, we're much stronger on lemon, but therefore we also can lower sugar, so we can work with less sugar. So now the most important thing as a chef is always stay curious. You have to keep on like looking and stay, curious about the differences or the new ingredients. Like, there's nobody that will push you except yourself in the end. So for us, well, this is one of our global ambassadors, and he's a great example of not announcing that the bakery is plant-based. And this we see everywhere happening. Like in Paris, there's so many bakeries that are plant-based they don't put it on their store. Same in the Netherlands. And so Tony was telling me there's a lady that comes a lot and is like, these are the best croissants. And his wife was saying to me, I don't know how to tell her that they're actually plant-based. I was like, just don't tell her. Because, you know, it's like it's an older lady, she was saying. And why do we need to say it's plant-based if we make great pastries? I mean, it's about eating great pastries. It's about indulgence. And it's about quality. And unfortunately, still, a lot of people have the feeling that plant-based can't be great quality. But today, with all the ingredients that are in the market, the knowledge, we can actually make excellent pastry.
Does anyone have questions for Marike? Lady here? Yeah.
What brought you to be interested exactly in vegan pastry?
So I've been lactose intolerant since I'm like 18, but really heavy. And yes, I do taste, and I had to taste, but I was always feeling sick. Not only that, I've got a lot of friends who are vegan, who are always saying like, oh, I'm so tired of the fruit salad. So that was one big reason. Already when I was working in Caprice in Hong Kong, if I would hear somebody, like, even if we knew it last minute, oh, that person doesn't eat this or doesn't eat that, I would always try and make last minute a great dessert as well. Because there's nothing more disappointing, like if you're restricted to gluten or eggs or, you know, plant-based, vegan, why can't you have a nice product? Why can't you have a nice dessert in the end? It should be for everybody, and it is possible. It is possible to eat great desserts and great pastry. And the second thing as well is it was the technology behind that really interests me. Like the research, the different ingredients, like at Big Advantage, I've been like doing quite a lot of masterclasses for Sosa over the world. Working in fine dining industry, we are so much more lucky to work with all these different ingredients, all these different textures. We are not restricted into it needs to hold in the store, it needs to be able to travel to the customer, stay well till if you buy it on Saturday till Sunday. So by that, I also have the chance to already work with way more of these ingredients. What does that mean? That it also becomes an easier thing because you kind of, like I said before, you start to connect the dots about, okay, but that does that. And then you're like, yeah, but wait a minute. And still our own recipes, we're constantly evolving. I had an amazing brownie recipe, but then I realized that it's a little bit tricky. So the water needs to be at 70 degrees, then I blend it with this. And so every time when I was teaching it, like people love it. But then they go, yeah, but it's a bit difficult. So we did again a new brownie recipe over the last 2 weeks, but I thought we did 15 tests, but we ran a couple of tests more. Because it's not only the ingredients, it's also the order of the ingredients. So for example, this exactly same recipe, I had said to my assistant, because I was traveling, so we do it on distance, she sent me pictures. I mean, I can't taste, but she tries and do videos and pictures. She's like, I'm stuck, I don't know what to do. I was like, oh, I think, because I really wanted to stay out of any protein or citric fibers or whatever we were using in the old one. And so she said to me, like, every time when I cut it, it just falls apart. So I was like, I think, well, then we have to add some protein because we're missing some of the texture. So I had said to her, like, mix the protein with the xanthan in the water. And so she had misunderstood. She mixed the xanthan in the water because xanthan helps me to recreate the texture, to change the viscosity of the water to look more like an egg. So, but she had put the protein powder in with the dry ingredients. And when I came back, I was like, oh, I like much more the top of that one. I don't like that one. She's like, yeah, that's the one I did as an error. I put the protein with the flour, and it looks so much better because it makes sense because now I'm already hydrating my protein before mixing it. So it became a very elastic dough, and she couldn't spread it out nice enough. So with that same recipe, you make two, and just putting it in water instead of in the dry ingredients, you make two complete different textures. But also, she had all the tests ready because obviously she froze them because I was away for a week. And then she was cutting them. I was like, but wait a minute, test 7 is where you were struggling. You couldn't cut it, and it cut perfectly. And she was like, yeah, I don't get it. I was like, well, it's the rest of the fat and the chocolate. The fibers have completely absorbed because it was completely no xanthan, no potato protein. So it was based on water. So we make a ganache with be better, water, chocolate, your dry ingredients, cocoa powder with the dry ingredients. So 2 types of sugar, flour. And just by having it rest and passing it through the freezer or through the fridge, your fat set, your chocolate absorbs, like all the fibers get really absorbs all the liquids, and she could cut it perfectly. So now we do have what we're going to publish will be the recipe with the xanthan and potato protein, because you need to be able to cut it on the same day, obviously. But that will be our tip, like, hey, if you pass through the freezer, you don't need all these extra ingredients. And just these minor changes a lot. Like pastry is already science, but plant-based pastry is a level above. Like Chris said it yesterday to me, and even today, he said, why did you go into plant-based pastry? Because pastry is already hard enough. I was like, yeah, I love to make my life a living hell sometimes, but, and pâte à choux is still on my... We had this conversation before. I managed to do it once or twice, and then I started to run out of time, and I started back, the traveling came back on. But at one point it got this bad that I would put the pâte à choux in the oven, and I would be like an hour in front of the oven. So I just started to put the pâte à choux in the oven, go for a run, come back. Because then at least you're not just sitting there and stressed. And so there is recipes that are way more difficult. And yes, time is of essence here, that's for sure. And time is of essence here, probably. Because I see somebody looking at the clock. Yes.
In traditional full-fat pastry recipes, you use liposoluble colorants in recipes.
Sorry, say again?
You use liposoluble powders in some recipes in full-fat. Does that change to water-soluble then with the addition of water to a recipe?
Oh, I'm not fully sure if I understand the question right.
So like you're adding colors, let's just say pistachio, you're adding like a green color to make it.
Oh, I don't add colorings.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, if you would want to add colorings, you can do it in your water as well. But of course, they won't absorb as fast. Or you blend them into your melted butter if you work with the butter melted. So, in general, I don't work with colors because I like natural colors of the product. Like a pistachio cookie can't be, when you bake it, like I bake it at 125 degrees to keep it like the best green color. So I bake it very low temperature, more time. But it will pick up a bit of color in the oven. I mean, the sugar starts to caramelize a little bit. And a green pistachio cookie cannot be completely natural. I like to stay away from colors. Like I rather have natural colors than all the crazy intense colors. Like if I want to have a red glazing, I work with a fruit puree. I start with raspberry puree. Are they harder to glaze with because you work with a pectin base? Yes, but you actually have a glazing that is fruit flavor instead of just sugar and water. Yes. Yes, we did. It's still a fat. So it's a very good question. It's still a fat. Nutritional-wise, we're the same, yet we don't have cholesterol, and we have unsaturated fats. So it is, in that sense, healthier, but still a fat proposition. Like, fats will never be healthy, but we also need fats, and we need fats in our recipes to structure recipes. But in terms of calories, we were hoping as well it was much less, but no. So it's based on shea. So the most is shea. Then we have organic coconut and sunflower oil with a bit of colza because of the situation with Ukraine. We can't get our hands on enough sunflower anymore. We started with sunflower. We just launched and we had to change our recipe already. And then lecithin and monodiglycerides. Yeah. So in the beginning, we even had E202 for shelf life. But then, with longer in business, we decided to change the packaging. So we could take out one of the ingredients to be even more natural. So we wanted to really, like, the least ingredients we can have, the better. And equally, every year, we will do a research within. It's a company called Eternity. Basically, what they do. We need to send them where we source our ingredients, transport to the Netherlands where we are produced, and then production packaging and resending over Europe. And you save, depending on the formula, 82 to 86% of CO2 and water even more. So it's a big difference compared to traditional cow butter.
Okay, any more questions? Okay, we might wrap up there. Marike is on Instagram, both your butter and under your own name, and she'll be around for a bit. Will you answer some questions if people want
Oh
to
yeah,
come up?
absolutely. Well, I will go back to the booth so you can come and taste.
Yeah, yeah.
So everybody hasn't tasted yet. There's a lot of things to taste because what is the most important thing for me tasting is believing. So and it's with everything. Like I can tell you a lot, but you have to taste it in applications.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, please give everyone a round of